good morning, good afternoon, and good night. I am your podcast host, Danny Vicente, and this is Coffee and Conversations, a place where we explore topics in technology, leadership, and innovation. Discussions about things that are keeping you up at night with industry experts, technology experts, and so much more. So grab your cup of coffee and join us as we dive in. Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good night. Thank you for joining another episode of Coffee and Conversations. I am your host, Danny Vicente, and today I have secured somebody on the podcast that I am extremely excited to talk to. Not only because I've been chasing him for, like 2 years to get him on the podcast, and he's finally agreed, but the topic that we're going to talk about is something that truly is near and dear to my heart. We are going to talk about career development, culture, coaching, leadership. All that is on, and I am going to let my fabulous guest introduce himself so that you all know why I'm so excited to have him on the podcast.
Hey, Danny. Apologies that it took so long, I guess. I lead the industry solutions team here at Cisco, and so we're a global team that takes everything that Cisco does and tries to put it in the customer of the language and make it relevant for our industries.
Awesome. Now, folks, like I said, that's his role here. But one of the things that has impressed me about Wes for a long time has been the development of culture of the folks around him, the teams he's led, and in his current role, his much larger team that he's now leading. And so, I guess I want to ask you right out the gate: why is culture so important? And seemingly, do you do that purposefully, or is that just a natural talent of yours?
That's a good question. Number one, it's super important. And number two, I think that when people think about culture, they probably try and think that there's a very specific thing that is a good culture. And one of the things that I think I've realized is that you create a culture, and of course you want that culture to be positive. So you want people to feel like they belong, people to feel like they're included, people to feel like they have a purpose. But culture can be different for different people and for different companies. And so Cisco, as you know, has a very fast-paced, high-energy culture. There are companies that are industrial stalwarts that have a more steady, consistent, very measured culture. And that feels really good for some people. And so it doesn't mean that you can pick one culture and say that's the best culture. Yes, we're the number one place in the world to work. But for a type of person, there are some people that might be overwhelmed by the speed and agility that we focus on here. So,
it's interesting you said it, because I often think even within Cisco, there's microcosms that of culture
100%.
that are different from the entire one. So
Yes.
to your point
Yeah.
there, I'm putting myself in the shoe of somebody who's looking at their career, and they are in an environment that maybe that culture doesn't fit. Or the opposite. They're in one where that culture is fantastic for where they are, but they're looking for their career growth. And navigating that kind of becomes a little scary or overwhelming. What are your words of thought for that?
Well, I think it's interesting because you do point out, like, especially in larger organizations, there can be the big company culture. So overall, Cisco has a culture. And then within teams, there are cultures. My team definitely has a culture, and I hope that the people that are in the team really enjoy the culture. There are other cultures within the company, and so I think fortunately for people who work for large organizations like Cisco, if there are multiple cultures in the company, the first place you can look is if culture doesn't feel like it's fitting you, is what other cultures around me might fit me. And I think it's a really hard thing to pinpoint, because if someone picks up the phone and calls you and says, "What's the culture of your organization?" Right? Everyone will use a lot of the cliche terms. Oh, well, we're collaborative, and we're a team, and we like having fun. Well, everyone wants that to be their culture. And so I think you really have to get to the individual contributors in the teams to really understand what the culture is like. So talk to 4 or 5 people who are deep in the team to really know what it feels like. Is there a lot of command and control, or is there a lot of autonomy? And I'm going to hand you a project and you figure out how to do it. Just an example of a question that you might have a discussion about not with the leader, because of course every leader is going to say, I'm hands off and I enable the whole team to do their jobs. But the reality is everyone says that, and we know that there are cultures where that doesn't exist. So some people maybe aren't being completely honest with themselves. No one likes to say, I'm a huge control freak and I want to see everything and I want to make all the decisions. That is the culture that I like to create. And so I think you have to get down into the organization to have those discussions. So I hope that that helps a little bit. You know, the other thing I think you asked is like, how do you take control of that a little bit, or how do you
Yeah,
think about your career?
absolutely.
The other thing that kind of pops into my mind is just knowing yourself. And I think for earlier in career people, that may be a harder thing to say is like, do you truly know what it is that fills your boat or fills your bucket and floats your boat and what you're good at? And those two, by the way, things don't have to be coinciding. I started my career here at Cisco as a salesperson and then a sales leader. And when I became a sales leader, I got really good at very complex Excel spreadsheets on goaling, setting goals for tens and sometimes hundreds of people across a globe and trying to make sure that they all add up to the totals for their region managers and their operation
Sure.
director. I was damn good at it, but I did not enjoy it. So you can be good at something and not enjoy it. And so really knowing yourself and knowing what you enjoy. And then the other thing I would say is try and be yes more than no. I came out
Love
of
that.
school as a mechanical engineering student, and here I am in an IT company, leading one of the leading IT companies, leading a team around how we translate technology into customer language. That's not something that you would have heard me say I wanted to do or had aspirations to do as I came out of university, or even as I finished my grad program. So when opportunities come along, if it feels like it may be a chance for growth and learning, try to say yes. It's scary, but try to say yes and don't always be focused on is it the next rung on the ladder? The rungs happen if you're happy, you're engaged, you're having fun, and you're making a difference.
I love that. No, there's so much there to unpack. I'm not 100% sure where to start, but we're gonna do our best. One of the things, I'm a huge advocate for Cisco, so I'm constantly trying to talk to folks that I think are brilliant, or my friends' kids who are graduating college. Yes, I'm that old.
I'm one
That are
here.
that are graduating college and coming this way. And one of the things I often tell them is that the career ladder isn't rung by rung. Sometimes you have to let go of that ladder and jump on another. But one of the things that you mentioned there was, and it's okay if that ladder is the wrong ladder. The
Yes.
only way sometimes you figure that out is by stepping onto that ladder and figuring out what's next. And so I guess I'm going to ask you to double down on that a little bit. And as we're looking at those ladders and we're climbing up, and we've all got this mental picture of what our career should be. How do we navigate those moments where maybe we're not in that right seat
Yeah.
and continue to move forward?
It's a solid question, and I think it goes back to it's somewhat related to like the say yes, but the people who I find are most successful in those moves are those who maintain the optimism. So
Yeah.
even if it feels like you're on the wrong ladder or it's not the right fit, what are you learning? What are you figuring out about yourself? What skills are you learning that you might be able to parlay into something else that you might enjoy more? It's really easy. We all are victim to it because we're all human. It's really easy to kick the dirt and say, this is bad. This is a challenge. I don't have this. I don't get this. I'm not getting that. But if you kind of flip that script and say, I know this isn't the right fit right now, but I'm learning people management or I'm learning how to manage across different pieces of the organization. That's been a big one for me in my 12 plus years at Cisco is the people in your org aren't the only people that you have to work with on a regular basis. And so you may have a situation where you have very few people to help you do the work and almost no budget to do that work. And some people would kick the dirt and say, that's terrible and it's frustrating and I need a new role. But there's something to learn from that. There's like I can be creative and find ways to do things with less budget. I can tap other people and learn how to internally sell and influence. Internal selling is huge at most companies and definitely at Cisco. And so just being able to tell that internal story. So I think flipping the script a little bit and rather than saying, hey, it's not a good fit. Yes, be self-aware that it's not a good fit. What are you learning while you're trying to find that next fit?
I love that. I love that. You know, my advice. I've had the pleasure of leading a few teams, and anytime somebody came to that conclusion, over time, one of the things I used to say is find your relevancy. Find that piece that you can hold
Yes.
on to that brings relevancy to your job. Continue to function that way because you will be seen and opportunities will grow for you from there.
Yes.
And so I loved everything you said there. So, folks, as you can tell, I told you this was a great man to have on the podcast. I'm very excited for that. And if you thought we're not going to have links, there are some links down below. Please click those. They're going to be about career and culture and, well, specifically the company we both work for. So please click those down below. If you have any questions, the man that pulled us together, we're going to shoot all the questions his way. He's going to spend the entire weekend answering them. So please ask your questions down below as well.
Definitely.
Um,
Yeah.
one thing I do want to ask you, Wes, is obviously your leadership is coming across very easily. But tell me a little bit about your career journey, your personal one, because you just said you came out of ME, and ME is a far cry from what we're doing now. So talk to me.
Yeah.
Where did this all come from?
So try and tell the story short because I'm not a spring chicken, but when I came out as an ME, I worked for a place that made parts for jet engines and space shuttles. Really
Awesome.
cool business. I was in the quality control department. I was in a dark room behind a screen that glowed most of the day, and I realized that wasn't for me. And again, like kind of that was the first time I was like, well, how do I find the good? How do I find the optimism in this? And one of the chances they gave me was we were going to outsource some of our quality control, and they said, "Can you go work with the outsourcers?" And this was like right as I was finishing undergrad, and it lit me up. It lit me up when I got to go spend time with those other companies. We were still talking very technical, so I was still being an engineer, but I was working with people and I
Yeah.
was talking about contracts and negotiations and opportunities. And so that's kind of where the light bulb first clicked. And then I got an amazing opportunity at a company that is now part of Eaton Corporation to be a sales and marketing engineer. And it was a rotational program. I spent a year and a half learning about all the pieces of the business. And at the end, I could go in to be product marketing. I could go be a sales engineer. And I went out into the field, into sales. And again, it was a perfect mix of I was in electric substations answering questions and troubleshooting on relay and control systems, but I was working with people and I was negotiating contracts and I was selling product and convincing someone that our solution was better than a competitor's. And when you have a bit of a competitive spirit and you have a bit of an A personality, that really makes you jazzed, like it really floats your
For
boat. And
sure.
so the combination of those things is where my career has always gone is how do I remain somewhat relevant in a technically challenged job, but also people, leadership, growth, all of those things.
I, I, I had a saying one time that you can build the greatest plan on the planet, but if your people can't execute it, the plan is worthless. And you just
Yes.
commented on people. Um, there's an aspect of pulling your team together and identifying the resources you need. But there's something that we throw around, and you hear it, and people often think it's cliche, and I don't. I have a saying that if I'm ever in a room and I'm the smartest person in the room, I'm in the wrong damn room, and I
Yes.
think some of
100%.
that comes around is opening that room up to everyone. And so the
Yes.
word I'm talking about here is inclusion, diversity, and I know it's something that you strongly believe in. So I want to ask you, why is that so important, and what does that mean?
Yeah. I think your comment there around are you the smartest person in the room is very relevant for the team I lead right now because I have a team full of people who are subject matter experts. Their job is to be the most knowledgeable or one of the most knowledgeable on their industry, but it's on their industry. It doesn't mean they're the most knowledgeable on competitive takeouts or contract negotiations or the most knowledgeable on a specific customer culture or what their
Sure.
recent annual report was or what their sustainability. There's so many other things that come into a discussion when you talk about how do you approach a solution to a customer problem that I think that's the thing that has been very interesting about building the culture of the industry team is yes, you're an expert, but you need everyone else to make this happen. And not only are you an expert, we want you to teach everyone else to fish. And so it's always that old adage, you can keep giving people fish or you can teach them to fish. And
For sure.
so we're trying to teach people to fish. And so to be seen as an expert and also be willing to teach people your expertise and teach people to fish is a unique challenge in a team, because those are, in some cases, those are two opposing feelings inside. I am the expert. I am the one who
Of
knows,
course.
and I'm willing to give all of that up to you so that you can be the expert and you can be the one who knows. And so that ties pretty well into inclusion, because everybody has to be able to be willing to share, and we learn more when there are more ideas and inputs on the table,
Completely.
and it just makes our company that much better. I know that we talked a lot about culture. um, the best way for me to talk about what we're looking for in our team, and I believe this is somewhat true when we talk about the bigger Cisco corporate culture as well, is smarts and heart. Like, I don't,
Love that.
and by smarts, I don't mean you have all the answers. I mean, you work smart, you're willing to learn, you're interested. And then do you have the heart? You really want to make a difference. You want to see the change happen. And so if, I always use the analogy with my team, there's a there's a large cruise ship and we're this little tugboat pushing the corner of that cruise ship, shifting the company's mindset to a consultative sales approach to solving problems. You've got to have heart to be willing to do that. And so I think that becomes, again, a big part of, those are the two criteria. It's not whether you're a man or a woman or non-binary. It's not whether you're straight or gay. It's not whether you're white, black, Asian. Like, it's do you have smarts and do you have heart?
I'm going to steal that from US every once in a while. I steal good
Go.
quotes, and I honestly love that one. So I think I will. But you mentioned something there, and it bringing that collection of individuals, bringing these folks with smarts and heart, but also different outlooks on life, different experiences, different mindsets. I used to have in my office, there was a picture of a dog laying on his back upside down, and it talked about changing your perspective and you change the world. And there's an aspect of there when you talked about bringing all those minds together. Nobody's going to look at that problem or that push of that giant cruise ship the same way. And
Right.
so let me ask you from a leadership perspective. You're on a team and you know that you need to start doing this. You need to start bringing in a more diverse and different
Mhm.
mindset to your team. Where do you start? How do you as a leader say it's time and put that first foot forward?
I think it's always the time, and so that's going to be an easy cliche answer. When is the time? It's
I
always the
love that.
time. But I think the most important thing that you can do is help people see themselves in leadership.
Yeah.
And so if you say it's time to have a more diverse workforce from women to men ratio, which of course we're working on in the tech
Yeah.
world at large,
Yeah, large, yeah.
never mind just Cisco. Do you have women engineering leaders? Do you have diverse women voices in your technical leadership track? Do you have them at the executive level? It's part of the reason I talk a lot about who I am and my personal journey and my family and my life, because it's important for people to see themselves. And so there's this old adage, and again, it sounds a little bit cliche in some ways, but it's really true. It's really hard for you to be what you can't see. And so if you are a young person of color and you don't see very many people of color in director, senior director, vice president roles at your company, how can you see and envision becoming that person? And so I think it's imperative on leadership to then create those opportunities for that visibility. So if you've got an open role and you're trying to create diversity and you're trying to let other people see what they could be, then you should fill that seat with someone that represents a diverse opinion or a diverse background, even a diverse education or a diverse part of the world. We've learned so much in my team just by bringing someone in who has lived in Singapore their entire life to the conversation,
Of
right?
course.
I'm an American and I'm proud of that, but also there are a lot of differing opinions and cultures that come with just different parts of the world. So how can we think about helping our global team without having the opinions of someone who lives in a different part of the world? It's why almost half of my team is now global.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, I tell the story, and the folks that have listened to my podcast before have heard the story, but I'll tell you, my family, majority of my family, in fact, still lives in Europe. And when I was young, my dad and mom used to send me to Europe, and my dad would come with me for a few weeks and then abandon me. No, he would leave me
Right.
there with
Bye.
family
Yeah.
the rest of the summer. And the perspectives that I brought back, when you're young, you don't appreciate that. But as you get older, you start to realize the perspectives you gained by doing that, living there for that long and seeing a different worldview. That's something that you can't be taught. You have to bring it in. And so I love the fact that you're talking about bringing in different worldviews because it is something that I think is truly valuable.
It's interesting you say that because I think it's just like learning a language. Appreciating those views is probably easier when we're younger. It's
Yeah,
easier to learn a language when you're 4, 5, 6. That's,
truly.
that's proven. It's probably true for appreciating or being willing to look at another opinion as well. And so you can still do it as an adult. You just have to work hard at it and recognize that it's work you need to do. And so rather than saying, I've been doing this job for 10 years, I know the answer to this question, pause for just a second and say, hey, random person in my team who doesn't really have the perspective that I have, how would you answer this question? You might be very surprised at the answer you get if you're open to the fact that it might be a better answer than the one you already have. If you're just going to dismiss it, don't ask the question. But if
100%.
you're open to like, wow, I never even thought about it that way, that would be pretty interesting.
I'm gonna ask you a question because it's something I believe, and God knows I've been wrong a million times here. But is it an aspect of ego for a leader? And I always look at it as bravery to put your ego aside and say, I'm going to ask this person who's not maybe in leadership but is on my team, what's your opinion? And wait for that answer. I'm asking the question of do you believe it's similar to that it is a brave action for a leader to step aside and put their ego aside?
Definitely. And I think there are lots of leaders who would be willing to ask the question. The real test is, are they willing to listen to the answer and consider it as an alternative, right? Because every book you read, every podcast you listen to tells you to ask those questions.
Yeah.
But the real crux is, do you listen to the answer? Do you consider it as an alternative to where your mind might have already been? And are you willing to shift that mindset? Sure, there are leaders who have egos who aren't willing to ask the question. But if step 2 is asking this question. Step 3 is really considering what the answer might be and if it changes the way you think about the world. But you hit on a really interesting point in that ego in leadership it's important because you need to be confident, you need to be able to lead
Of
your
course.
team, you need to be able to show them that there is confidence in the direction we're going, but almost it's so easy to over rotate on that. It's so
Oh yeah.
easy to over rotate on that. And so I think it's harder for as people move up the ladder in leadership to keep that ego in check and be like, you know what? I have the privilege of leading this team, but this team is full of really smart people who have really good answers. So you tell me, and then we'll work together to determine what the best possible path is rather than I'm in front and I'm telling you.
Yeah. Yeah, I had a mentor for years in talking about that. She used to tell me all the time, Danny, it's okay to be confident. Because I used to always try to force myself to be small in a room. And she
Yeah,
said, be
yeah,
confident because it's the only way you're going to lead. She says, the danger in that is the old adage of drinking your own Kool-Aid. Because there's no Kool-Aid sweeter than the one you make yourself.
that's
And
right.
so, it's that aspect. And I love what you're saying there.
It's a
Folks,
good
I'm going to
balance.
remind you again, there are some links down below. And as always, please ask us questions. I'd be happy to answer them. I will shoot any questions you have for Wes directly over to him as well, and we'll try to get back to you. Obviously, we're not going to be able to cover every specific point within these topics, but if you guys respond a lot, maybe I can intrigue him to get back on the podcast and go a little deeper. So as you talked about diversity, or we've talked about diversity and inclusion and all those kind of things, and I feel I'd be remiss not to comment on the fact that you are an executive sponsor in Cisco's Pride ERO, and I'd like to discuss what does that mean to you, and what does that mean to Cisco?
Yeah. Part of it comes down to representation. Again, I talked about like it's hard to be what you can't see. And as I moved into especially a director level role, I think this started to gnaw at me a little bit that like I have a husband, we have an adopted child, but was I visible, right? Because for some aspects of diversity, you look at someone and you see that diversity. You look at me and you see a middle-aged white man.
Sure.
You don't necessarily see that I do have a husband and that I am part of the Pride community. And so um, I think speaking out about that and becoming involved in being an executive sponsor and letting people know that that if you are part of the Pride community, you can move up in the executive ranks, and that Cisco believes in true full spectrum diversity. And so when they think of diversity, when the company talks about diversity, it's not just through one's lens, it's through all the possible lenses. And so the more we can let people see themselves, then the more they could see that they could be in those roles. And so as I moved from director to VP, it was important for me to continue that sponsorship and become part of the executive sponsorship team for the Pride ERO so that people see that there are vice presidents who are part of the Pride community. And fortunately, we have a number of those. Unfortunately, we've probably got more of those that aren't quite comfortable being part of that community yet. And so even in a company that has an amazing amazing culture of inclusivity and diversity like Cisco, we always have work to do to make people feel
Sure.
like they can be comfortable and, as our company says, bring your whole selves to work, but really like be who you truly are, right?
Yep.
And some people, of course, especially my immediate direct team is probably like, okay, a little less of who you actually are, please. We're good, right? We've got enough of who you truly are, but like truly bringing your own personality and being who you are, right? Like I have a dry sense of humor, right? So the deadpan, like bring that. Like people want to know who you are. People want to know that you've got a daughter that's looking at colleges. People want to, they relate to you that way, especially in a hybrid world where we don't get to spend so much time together.
Yeah, totally.
People are human and they want to relate and they want to hear your story. Since the beginning of time, before we could write, when humans were just in existence, they would grunt stories around the fire and tell stories around the fire before we had a way of documenting any of it. People still love stories. It's in our being to want to hear those stories. And so they want to know who people are, especially in roles that they aspire to be in.
I have a question for you because without sounding corny or on the moment, you just sort of pulled up my heartstring there for a second. And what's your advice for folks that maybe aren't comfortable there, that want to be who they are because it's a way for them to be more real and present and effective, but maybe aren't comfortable just yet?
It's always going to feel like it's a risk. And the thing that we talk about a lot in the Pride community is you do you on your own time. And so, of course, if you're not comfortable sharing, if you're a more private person, regardless of what it is, whether it's related to who you're dating or married to, or whether it's related to the hobbies that you like to do outside of work, if you don't want to talk about it, that's okay. You don't have to talk about it. But I think we're always, as a company, thinking about the people who they do want to share, they just might be afraid to. And so it goes back to some of the bravery, right?
Yep.
It takes a little bravery. And then I think it's being in a team and a company that you feel like you can do that. I don't know if I would work for an industrial stalwart 20 years ago that I would have felt comfortable with that
Sure.
discussion and always bringing my whole self to work. So environment matters. And like we talked about, teams have different cultures within the company. I've had plenty of discussions with people that are like, I really love the fact that Cisco supports this bring your whole self to work concept. I don't feel comfortable with my leader. Uh, it goes back to then like know yourself,
Yeah.
own your career, and if you really don't feel like you can be yourself and you truly want to share and you don't feel comfortable, you feel scared, bring it up to another leader who you trust and possibly find a way into a new part of the organization. Again, the benefit of tens of thousands of roles in a single company is there's a lot of ways you could spin this thing. And so go find a way to be happy.
I love that. I love that. I think that's a great segue because my next question is going to be, how are you bringing up the bench of your leadership? I mean, clearly you are a leader of leaders, but you're always growing that bench. And so what are you doing to promote the leadership within your leaders already, but also look for more leadership opportunities below that?
Yeah, I think for my direct team, and I hope they would say this, and so maybe it's a question you ask them, but I like to think that there are things that would typically sit on my plate to structure or decide, and instead I step back and hand that to one of them to structure or decide. And it's a learned leadership trait, at least for me. Maybe a lot of people come with it, but um, those things that really matter to the organization, critical strategic decisions, to hand those to someone is a true form of trust.
Oh yeah.
And so, and we all have new leaders in our teams at different times. And so it goes back to a little bit of the risk, but also like hire good people that have smarts and hearts and then trust them. And so being willing to trust and hand off something that typically would be a VP level responsibility or a VP decision, I'm going to hand it to somebody in my team and say, you work with the rest of the team and you tell me what the recommendation is. And so if I look across my leadership team, I've got people working on uh, projects in my direct team that affect the entire organization. So they
Hmm.
may have responsibility for just a small piece of the organization or a portion of the organization, but they almost all of them have a project or more that affects the entire organization. And so keep giving people visibility into the bigger picture, I think is key. And then we encourage those leaders to do that as well. And so instead of having one of our industry subject matter experts pick an industry, just working on things for that industry, give them the opportunity to say, look, if you were in my shoes and you led all four of these industries, how would you look at this across all four
Yeah.
industries? What would you develop differently than just your little silo? And
Sure.
so continuing to push people to have that visibility outside of their remit, I think is definitely a way to grow. And then I do probably, whether they love it or hate it, depending on their personality, push it back on them a little bit. One of the questions I asked in my development conversations that we just finished is, what do you want to try or learn?
I love
And
that.
I told them after having those discussions that I probably should have sent those questions out beforehand. But on the flip side, I actually enjoyed that they were like in the moment, because
Sure.
if you ask someone, what do you want to try? What do you want to learn? And it's just an open-ended question, you might be surprised at the answer. And so rather than me thinking, I'm going to develop this person with this specific approach, I don't know, Danny, do you want to learn more about legal? Cisco legal? Like, I didn't know that maybe. And
Right.
so now like I'm gonna try and get you a mentor in legal and maybe get you into a couple of the legal training courses that we've got available on MindTickle or something, right? Like
That's awesome.
helping people develop not only what you need for your org, but also what they might actually want personally for themselves as well is probably the two things that I'm always trying to think about.
Love that. So something you said there, I want to come back to. I'm a firm believer that I think that every person inherently wants to do a good job. And
Yeah.
your role as a leader is to encourage them, enable them, make sure there's no hurdles in their way, and then, for lack of a better term, get the hell out of their way and let them do their job. So you commented on giving aspects of your VP role down to your leadership, how do you ensure that they're ready for that? And then when do you know how to take your hands off? And this can be, this can be taken down to a much lower level, but in your specific role, how do you know when it's time to just back away and let them do their thing?
Yeah. Great question. I think it's test and correct, test and correct, test and correct, right? So give them something, trust them to do it, and have them come back to you and then discuss, right? We spend a lot of time. It's not like go do this project and whatever you decide we'll implement with blinders on and no questions or discussions at all.
Sure.
It's go off and do this project and bring it back to your peers and have your peers say, well, yeah, but you didn't think about my org in that view, and it's supposed to be for the whole group. So, or you totally missed this part of the segment or this part of the globe. And all of those feedback loops are learning opportunities because every time then someone goes, oh, the next time, right? The next time I get a project, I'm definitely going to make sure it has a global aspect to it. I was thinking too much with my American hat on or my German hat on, based depending on where they're sitting. And so it is an iterative process. It's not just I'm going to blindly trust and you decide and implement it and we'll look at what happens a year from now and hope that you did something good. And then the more people get to the point where you come back to that review meeting, most of the time with their peers, right? Like let's discuss, because it's not a review period to like tear something apart or find
Sure.
what's wrong. It's like, do we all agree that this is the way forward for the organization? And the more often that someone comes back to that review period and I start to observe that like all the bases were covered, all the things were considered, all the right people were consulted, then you can start to trust and give even bigger responsibilities. And so look, if you did a project on how does technology affect people who are incarcerated, and you never had a conversation with legal, that's probably like you're probably not thinking big enough yet, right? Because anything related to incarceration and the justice system probably does have a legal aspect to it, even if it's just like, are we covered and safe making good decisions on behalf of the company? And so again, the more you come to those review processes and people are like, sounds good, looks like you've got it all covered, the more you can trust. Now, the delicate balance is making sure that you've got a team that's feels safe with each other, that they can ask those questions, and everyone doesn't just, yes, that looks great. Yes, that looks great. Like, wait a minute, you totally missed this, and I'm not attacking you because of it. I'm making you better because of it.
Yeah. There's again, your answers. I love them because there's so much to unpack. But there's something I want to touch on there because it's something I know.
It's a nice way of
but
saying that's a lot of words.
No, not at all. There's a lot of great points. But what I know of you and what I saw there in your answer is something I want to touch on. A lot of time with new leaders, their sense of success is that they have completed a task or a project or they've hit a metric.
Yep.
But what I saw in you was your sense of success was when you could walk away, when you knew that they were ready to take that project. And there was an aspect of your success is based on your people, not necessarily that metric, because the metric will happen with those people. And so I want to touch on that because, again, I watched you sort of light up as you were saying it. You didn't use those words, but I watched your face. How do you encourage that from your leadership to value that aspect as well, and not just maybe the KPI that's on the docket?
Yeah, I think it's never probably easier for one team than the other, but I think it is inherent. And there's no way my entire team does their job without even our individual contributors being able to do that. Our job is to teach and scale how to sell into industry, how to be relevant to a customer's actual outcomes. And so we have to be able to share the information and then trust that the company will be successful because we've taught people to fish. And so I do think it comes with some bit of natural selection in the role. There are some people who would look at my organization and say, wow, but like your team is very rarely the man or the woman or the person that has gets to hold the single trophy over their
Sure.
personal head and say, I won. That's not the type of team that we're building. We're building a team of how are we winning as a team? How are we helping other people win? And so, in a way, there's a bit of a nurture that comes with that from not only my leadership team, but also from my individual teams. And that doesn't mean soft. It means I need to nurture the people around me because the only way I can win is if 10 people around me win. And it becomes almost part of the job description. And so I don't know whether that answered your question about how
It
you do
absolutely
it,
did.
but for us, it's like, it's an imperative. You can't not do it because the only way my leaders win is if 10 people in their team are all successful. And the only way those 10 people win is if 3,000 sellers around the globe start to drink what we're serving
For
and
sure.
transform the way they're selling to their customers so we can grow the business.
I love that. I love that. Folks, as I told you, I was super excited to have him on the podcast, and I have a feeling you guys are having a fun podcast as well. Please submit your questions below and click those links and dive in a little bit more into some of the topics we're talking about here at Cisco. We are at my favorite part of the podcast, which Wes is unfamiliar with, and I love that aspect. But I do want to let you guys know something, that this is part one in a leadership series we are going to be doing here on Coffee and Conversation. So again, your questions do matter, because if there's enough of them, I can wrangle Wes in to come one more time and maybe talk a little deeper at some of these topics. Okay, Wes, this is my favorite part because it's the one part that there's no prep for. So if you are like me, you spent a little bit of time before you came on with me thinking about, okay, Danny's going to ask this question and I'm going to answer this, and he's going to bring up this topic and I'm going to answer this. And inevitably, because I am who I am, I didn't do those things. Or maybe I did, and I didn't ask one of the questions that you were waiting for. So my question now to you is a freestyle. If there's one thing that our audience should walk away from this podcast with, what's your one thing?
Well, you would like to think that I did prep. I think especially for the world that we live in now, and this isn't just Cisco specific. Obviously, we love what we do here and we think we're really good at it, but this is for really the tech world and maybe even just the general world we live in now. There is you have control over yourself, your own decisions, your willingness to be optimistic or pessimistic. But there are so many things, and we've learned through so many events that have happened, not even just 3 years ago, but recently, there are so many things that could happen that we just can't predict. And I think that attitude and willingness to change is going to win the day. And so I talk about it all the time with people who are new to my organization. Ride the wave. Yes, my organization is a great example. We just moved into a different organization. I have a different leader. That would be the third or fourth time in the last 3 or 4 years. Our charter has not changed.
That's awesome.
Our goals have not changed. What we're trying to accomplish, big picture in the company, has not changed. Will our metrics shift a little bit? Of course, that always happens. Welcome to corporate America. But whatever wave you're on right now, ride the wave. Don't try not to be drowned by the wave and worried about when the wave is going to hit the beach and you're not going to be on the wave anymore. Be in the moment, ride the wave. We just had an offsite with my entire organization, and one of the takeaways for us was anchor here with us. Like, be in this moment with us now. Don't think about the way it used to be 4 years ago. Don't think about the way that it might be in the future. This is the moment. And so ride the wave you're on and live in this moment and kind of anchor here with us now. is kind of the message that we've been sending for my team. And I think it's applicable for everyone. There's so many things that can change. Live today, ride the wave now, and make decisions for yourself. Make decisions on where you want your career path to go. And I think you mentioned it earlier, and it's a throwaway comment at this point, maybe, but it's not always about the next rung in the ladder, right? When I joined Cisco, I left a director level role at another company to be a product sales specialist. And so, and I'm very happy I did, and I've had a great career here at Cisco. And so don't always be worried about that next rung. Ride the wave, be yourself, own your career.
No, I love that. I love that. I always feel privileged and honored when somebody spends some time with me, and that no more true today. I honestly, I appreciate you spending an hour with me. I know our audience took a lot from this. I know I personally took a lot from this, and I am going to order you a giant surfboard to replace the plane behind you, so that we can ride that wave together.
Ride that wave. Yep, ride that wave. Yeah.
But sincerely, Wes, I want to thank you for joining the podcast. Folks, I want to thank you for listening, and please do submit your questions, and we'll get back to you and enjoy this series of leadership on Coffee and Conversation.
Hey, thanks, Danny. I've enjoyed the podcast as they are to date, and I'm looking forward to more. And so we appreciate you doing this and helping to tell people's story and help people understand everything that Cisco does, from industry specific to technology to leadership. So thank you for doing this.
Thank you. We'll see you in the next one, folks. So long.